Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen. This is My Life as a Landlord. I am so pleased you are educating yourself about your landlording and long-term rentals. Thanks so much. Today's show is the final episode of a three-part series all about tenant transitions. Episode 94 was about marketing your unit. Episode 95, which was last week, was what to do when a tenant gives notice. And today's episode is about renting to roommates. So, what happens when you get an application from two people who are either a couple or two unrelated individuals who are roommates? And quite frankly, we look at them at this as at the same thing. Like, it doesn't matter to us if they're a couple, if they're together or not together romantically. It does not matter to us. But there are parts of the qualification process and the lease that they're evaluated as individuals, and then there are parts that they're evaluated together. Either way, here are some of the best practices that I have found renting to roommates. Now, when we get an application with adults, and we're just saying it's two adults, I'm not going to complicate it with too many more aspects of this. Let's just talk about renting to roommates. If you get an application of adults, whether they're a couple or just roommates, they must qualify their behavior separately, meaning I've got to see that they've both been good renters before, especially if they haven't rented together before, right? You've got, individual one coming from someplace, individual two coming from someplace, and they go, hey, let's live together. And they find themselves on my application page and they're applying together. I still have to qualify them separately because if one has been in mischief and the other one hasn't, I still have to qualify them as individuals. And that's true whether they're romantically involved or not, okay? So you've got to qualify them behavior separately, but we look at their income together because they're now going to be paying for this unit as one. And that's going to come into play here shortly. The other thing we look at them is the being count together, meaning heartbeats. How many people, how many things are living in this unit, whether they're renting a 1-bedroom, a 4-bedroom house, whatever. If they've got pets or kids or other things going on, you have to make sure that regardless of who's bringing what into this unit, you have to add it all up and make sure that they can all fit. We don't want 10 people living in a 1-bedroom unit, okay? The other thing that happens when you've got roommates, you very likely will have more than one vehicle. Now, if your unit is not equipped for multiple vehicles or it only comes with one parking space, you need to prep that. You should probably also put that in your lease saying, look, your unit only comes with one parking stall that's either assigned or maybe it's unassigned, and the other vehicle cannot be parked in the parking lot. It's got to be parked out front or paid parking or wherever the other parking is. I'm sure there's parking around your unit, but maybe there isn't, right? So parking is another big thing. We have in the past rented to big families who have rented 3-bedroom units, and they've had 6 vehicles. And that actually was the reason why we couldn't rent to them, is that, look, it's too much mayhem. We can't rent to you with all of these vehicles and all of this stuff. You can't do that. So just be aware that, and there are other aspects that you can look at it too. So if you're a seasoned landlord, jump into the Facebook group and talk to us about your community and some other issues you found with renting to roommates. But behavior, they've got to be qualified separately. Income is together, being count is together, and then your vehicles. Also, there you've got to look for the normal tenant screening stuff that are deal breakers, meaning typically for us, we try not to rent to smokers. That is very difficult for us. You've also got to look at other aspects with pets. If they've got puppies, we don't rent to people with puppies. I'm a huge dog person. If you listen to the show for a while, I've lost my German Shepherd Golden Retriever Mac. Huge dog fan, love dogs, but they've got to fit the criteria so that they're not causing damage and they're not causing mischief and they're not causing noise, right? That's another issue. Okay, let's go back to renting roommates. If there are two unrelated individuals that are coming together for the first time, let's say that each of them are qualified, that we get through this, they all have their landlord reference, they have their pay reference, they have their vehicles, that they've met all the criteria and we have qualified them. I have a very special bit that I talk with them about and say, look, you guys are now operating as a team. On the lease, you are one team. So I get one payment for things like security deposit and rent. We don't accept partial rent. I don't accept rent from one roommate and rent from the other roommate. That doesn't work. You guys consolidate it, you guys figure it out, and you send me one payment for your one unit. That's how we do it. So they act as one party in the lease. So it's the same with payment, that if one roommate doesn't pay, guess what? They both don't pay, because even if one roommate were to send us a partial rent payment, it's not the rent payment, right? Also, if one roommate is misbehaving and there's some mischief going on, they're both misbehaving. So again, when I'm bringing tenants on, they now become a team, one payment, one lease, and one unit. So if somebody's either not paying or they're not behaving, guess what? The eviction is the unit, not the person. Okay, so I always have to prep that when especially if they're new to roommates. They've never been roommates with each other before. I always say the same thing. Look, if you guys do not work out, if this does not work for you, this is how this goes. So the other thing that we have to talk about is the deposits that are returned at the end of the lease. I do not return partial deposits. No, the deposit is held for the time that the unit is there, right? If one roommate moves out, and then the remaining roommate, let's say the remaining roommate just wants to take over the lease. Well, they have to then requalify, because that is a huge jump in cost, in income. So we've got to requalify them, say, you know what, do you make enough money? Are you going to be able to do this? Because if we're setting them up for failure, this is not going to work. So if they want to stand alone and stay alone in the unit, then they have to requalify. We have to agree to that. But if they want to replace the unit, let's say it doesn't work out, or the one roommate got a job somewhere else and they have to leave, so they have to find another qualified person. And so that new qualified person would have to apply separately, get qualified separately, make sure that they're going to behave and that they've got their income. And then what we would end up doing is the incoming tenant would have, or incoming roommate would pay the outgoing roommate the deposit. As a landlord, I'm holding that unit, I'm holding that contract. I do not give partial deposits back. That's very simple. So if they want to talk about deposits, they transfer the deposit independent of me. I do not give back partial deposits. Okay, so then paperwork wise, when they're ready to do this and we've qualified the incoming roommate, then we have just one simple sheet that says that, on this lease that was signed on such and such a day between roommate 1 and roommate 2 and the landlord, we agree to remove roommate 2 and put in roommate 3, and then everybody signs it. And we usually do it by DocuSign. But I also send the existing lease to the new roommate and say, are you sure you want to sign up for this? Because once you sign this, you are on it. So they have to agree to all of this. But again, we don't return partial deposits. We make sure that everybody is aware of the situation with the roommates. But other than that, whether they're romantically involved or not, which doesn't got anything to do with me, everybody's got to behave, everybody's got to pay on time, everybody's got to adhere to the rules. But that's how we approach renting to roommates, is everybody's got to qualify on their own. We have to be very realistic on the living situation, if they're actually going to be able to live together and be successful roommates together. Yeah, it's really interesting how this all works. But again, we don't look at them as renting to two individuals. We're renting to one team in one unit, which means we get one payment. Now, when we return the deposit at the end, that may be what you're asking. Let's say that the tenants, because this whole series has been about tenant transition, let's say the roommates are giving notice and saying, we are actually departing the unit. We have given proper notice. We're going to leave the unit. Okay, so then what I will do is, at the end of all this, when we do the move out inspection and it's time to return the security deposit, typically we write a check to both roommates, which means they both have to sign it or they both have to go cash it. In Canada, we can e-transfer. In the States, you can Venmo or Zelle or however you want to do it, and we would do half. So, but this is very interesting, because what happens if tenants are departing, the roommates are departing because they've broken up, they were a romantic couple and now they've broken up and they're not on speaking terms? Again, I always say the same thing. That's got nothing to do with me. I have to return the security deposit to both occupants who both paid the security deposit, and we go from there. So that's how we approach renting to roommates. It can be a little bit interesting because it is a weird tenant transition, But the biggest thing is that we don't do partial anything. We don't do partial payments. We don't do partial deposit returns. We don't do partial evictions. We don't do that. It's you're renting the unit, right? You're not into the drama that is going on inside the unit. That's got nothing to do with you as a landlord. Okay, so one thing I want you to think about is adding into your existing lease package, especially if you have a lease addendum that you kind of add to. You might consider adding a section on adding a roommate. How does this actually work? And so I have one section in my lease addendum that is just about if you want to add a roommate, here's how you do it. And it is literally exactly what I just explained in this episode of have them go to the website and qualify here and submit pay stubs and ID and go through the whole thing. And if they have a pet, here's how they do it. And then the whole qualification process of we have to qualify them. And then, just exactly what we said is we don't do partial payments. You would do one rent payment. You would do one security deposit. The incoming roommate would pay the partial deposit to the outgoing roommate. And that way the outgoing roommate is completely out of it. And then we would sign. And all of that is in the lease. So when it pops up, because you and I both know that life happens where, people get sick, people pass away, people move. And so they say, hey, can my neighbor move in? Can my sister move in? Okay, that's fine, but this is how we have to do it. And it's right in the lease. So even if you're not anticipating it, it's sort of in your template lease addendum. That's how we do it. So think about that. If that is not in your lease already, I highly encourage you finding something about, or either finding it or adding it yourself. Just go back and talk about the points here. And there's plenty of other landlord references or resources that you can find, especially in your local area, that will help you figure out how you can add lease wording for roommates into your existing lease package. There you go. In today's episode, I talked about how to rent to roommates, how to qualify them, how they must act like a team on the lease, and what happens if one of the roommates gets replaced. If you enjoyed today's show, the biggest compliment you can give me is by leaving a review so that the people who need me can find me.